All right. Good morning, everybody. And yeah, first of all, thank you for coming out. Hopefully, everyone's as dry as possible. We had a bit of a rainstorm last night. So still had fun running through it. A little bit of rain, just a mite. So yeah, if welcome to dynamically scaling macOS: How, When, and Why. This was not my first title because I go through a lot of them. I first went with Mac in a Mac in a Mac. Which is cool. I'm going to just mention this tidbit. I'll probably do it later as well. Nested virtualization today only works for like a Linux container inside of something else. So you can do a Mac, you can do a Linux machine in a Mac, but not quite a Mac in a Mac in a Mac yet, sort of. Also had the levels of abstraction, but I thought Matryoshka is not always the little Russian nesting dolls, the first thing folks think of. And then I kind of went Shakespearean with it, and it really just ran off the page. So full disclosure, this is sort of what are you hearing? Obviously, there's terrible jokes already. This is just me here. All these opinions and statements are my own. I'm going to be talking about stuff very much that I have either done or do. So this is I'm here as I guess another member of the community to just show you some of the cool stuff I've done, or in this case, what we're looking at today. Of how do you get a Mac, which is a very very big question. A little bit about me. That's obviously not me. This is AI's version of, I think it was like a mobility solutions engineer or something. I'm making that shirt. Hopefully I'll have that next year. It is the cutest cloud I've ever seen. But I'm Dave Siederer. I've been around Apple for kind of a while. Today I am an expert on AWS EC2 Mac. And my former lives, I developed automated deployment back in 2011 for a reseller. Also was the youngest one on staff at an Apple store at one point. So they snuck me into some events. Thank you all for that. And nobody's here from that anyway, so no incriminating. And responsibility for anything you would worry about if you dropped it into a bathtub at a PR firm. I was a solo IT person. It is a trial by fire in the least. So yes, it gave me a lot of lessons, especially as an admin who really didn't have a budget at that point. This is a little bit of my getting started too. Oh wait, hang on. I had this. Yep, there we are. Realized I was over the wrong image. This is me. This is not machine made. And this is, I think, one of two non-machine made images that you'll see here. I had a little bit of fun with AI otherwise. But yeah, that's me on the LC. I'm playing a very, very old game and probably just thinking about how I'm going to rip into it with ResEdit in about 5 minutes. Yep, that was, I think it's a deleted slide. I have a picture of the watch came from Radio Shack. So I'm just using all the old people words here. So speaking of the old people words, we are going to go back to the beginning. And it's weird to be kind of talking about cloud computing as a beginning, but there's sort of a general, I would say, rhythm to things when it comes to just compute in general. I call it the pendulum. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of other names for this. This was just sort of the shower thought that developed into this. But really simplified, it's where the most processing happens, where we'll see on the one hand, for example, really powerful AI models that can only be run in cloud or on server. And then all of a sudden we see or we've got more powerful local machines that can actually run even more. So just moving between that sort of local data processing and outside of the unit that you're holding is just sort of a thing that's happened with kind of regularity over the years. So being able to say, okay, I want to process this file, rather than saying, okay, it can take me, 3 hours on my personal Mac, or it'll take me 2 minutes on a cloud machine. That's really where that kind of comes in. And then, of course, I've got an M4 in front of me, and I'll admit I've been putting this thing to image generation tasks as well, and it's pretty quick. So yeah, it's I'd say right now we're kind of highly oscillating, but that's a good thing for us. So yeah, back to the beginning. Timeshare was not something that you would run away from when someone was trying to sell you a vacation to own. Time sharing was back in the days when computing was mysterious and important, and networking really meant waiting your turn. These early Multitasking was not really something. Most of the time, a task was happening, and then it was going to go to the next user and process their task. And even with some of these more advanced things, they used what were called dumb terminals, which it's not an insult, it's just what they are, and it's still kind of what we use today in a little bit one form or another in the terminal. So speaking a little bit on the cloud, of course, data centers did exist before the cloud. My question always was, define cloud, because it's a little word that has a whole lot of kind of implications to it. It's not just somebody else's computer, but that's a good start. Elastic systems to take your processing on demand in pieces and scale as needed. It's kind of a little bit of an abstract, but the idea is instead of having one server, you'd want to break your program into the parts that make sense and have those parts execute as needed and scale as needed. So if you get popular, your app is going to scale with you. And if you get too popular, there are options to make sure that that cost doesn't go too far away. But I want to take things back to the basics first. This is, of course, I'd say probably about 90% of this room has one of these in front of them, a bare metal Mac. You're running macOS on a Mac. It's the first original way to get a Mac. Those Macs are made of matter. Very simple. License from Apple for macOS does include the ability to run 2 virtual machines, and we'll get to that in just a bit, along with up to 2 remote GUI sessions. This has to do with if you're ever kind of dialing into your Mac, specifically you can have a single session over VNC, but if you're connecting with either Apple Remote Desktop or the screen sharing app, that actually can open a second session as a second user. You would just need that second user to be connecting through a Mac. And of course, automated enrollment is really dependent on that chain of ownership. So how do you get a Mac? I think it seems like most of us have it figured out. Your friendly neighborhood Apple Store or national reseller. Don't do larceny because you shouldn't steal Macs. Also, the chain of ownership makes automated device enrollment a little bit of a challenge. So getting a Mac takes however long it takes to get to you. And depending on the reseller, you can do things like pre-caching, getting things set with certain pieces of software, whether that's pre-enrollment or just sort of making sure that something's in that cache to make it easier for the person that first opens it up. Now, using a Mac, again, something we're very familiar with. You're running macOS on Mac hardware. All the hardware encryption that you get from File Vault, all the performance that you would get from the raw machine, automated device enrollment, as you know and love, feel about it, and 2 virtual machines running on top. So virtualization, kind of what is this? This is running a Mac inside of your Mac. And before Apple Silicon, there were hypervisors like VMware's ESXi that would basically be able to kind of take over the entire system of a donor Mac and allow that to run the virtual machines kind of as at a very low level. Things have changed a bit with Apple Silicon, what's called the virtualization framework. The virtualization framework also does enforce the license requirement for only 2 simultaneous virtual machines. And there is new support in Sequoia for Apple account sign-in. This is something I have had a chance to test as well, and it's interesting just because when it comes to potential applications of somebody signing in with an Apple account to a virtual machine, there's a good few kind of use cases there. And some cloud providers, not all, do offer a VM. This is something it's almost definitely, if you're getting access to something, it's going to be clarified to you. But that is something to keep in mind when you're kind of going out to look for, okay, what do I need? What kind of power do I need? Or do I just need something that moves really fast up and down? And performance, it really is very, very dependent on RAM and resources, because as we were talking about kind of the VMware approach in the past, you didn't really have other things running on the system. In this case, there is another Mac OS. You basically have 3 Mac OSs inside your Mac. So if you were to do something on the host, and then the VMs are not necessarily going to get the same performance. So it's usually not a 50-50 split. And That's just something good to keep in mind. Typically, one virtual machine is going to run very well, but two, just make sure that you kind of test out your application and that it's running as fast as you want it to. And the neat thing, of course, snapshots. Being able to roll right back to an exact state is one of the most powerful things about a virtual machine, which is something that really isn't very common on macOS. We'll get into imaging and its zombie status in just a bit. But virtualization is one of those things that can be really good for parallel tasks. If you just have to run 1, 2, 1, 2, or just have two continuous tasks, they're not necessarily as processor dependent. They just need to be done on this Mac. If you want to preserve those exact configurations, like I said, at points in time, and I did spoil this one a little bit, doesn't quite split the resources 50-50. You can run beta versions of macOS within here too. This is one of a few very cool ways to actually get your hands on the beta. I'm a big believer in that too. I say I get itchy when I'm running production software. I really just want to, I like to file my bugs, hopefully before anybody else sees them. But with macOS 2, that virtualization framework, it can only go back so far when it comes to Apple Silicon. So it's things that's able to run that particular machine. Testing with management does require guidance. This was a different session, but this is the feature set is really out of the virtualization framework on Apple Silicon. Portability is not a guarantee as well. So how do you virtualize is a big question. The neat thing is you can just start downloading an app, just as a few of them, UTM, Tart, VirtualBuddy. These are all using that same framework, that same virtualization framework. QEMU as well. VirtualBox is an older name, but is one that definitely is still working out there. Virtu-Anka is paid software, but is also pretty amazing when it comes to orchestration and just sort of if you needed to keep a whole lot of images and have those passed out. That's really where that type of thing comes in. And Parallels, of course, this is probably the first name in the when it comes to virtualization. At the very least, that was the first VM that I ever ran on an Intel Mac. And VMware Fusion does still exist. There's not a lot to be done with it on Apple Silicon. It's on the more basic side, but it does still exist. So I do want to kind of, at the very least, make sure folks know that, because it also is oddly free. It's free for business users included. So yeah, I'm not here to sell you on absolutely anything. So yeah, this was more of a I found this thought it was interesting. So next on to containerization. Containerization, for some reason or another, every time I ask an AI, give me containerization, it is the happiest container. Happiest one you've ever seen. They're all so giddy. And containerization, again, very high level. It's a VM, but not quite all of one. You can think of it, and again, this may not be quite the exact terms, but think of it almost like an app with all of its dependencies, all its architecture in one file that you can launch. This is something we see a lot in Linux. macOS licensing does make containerization a challenge when it comes to macOS, but this is not. This is something that definitely is being worked on by the community. So we have solutions like Mac Stadium Orca, for example, is doing that. Docker Desktop again as well. Darwin Containers is up to version 0.0.9. I thought it was 0.0.1, but that actually has changed. I'm very curious to see what Apple does with their new container framework. If they do ever evolve that beyond the Linux framework, it's going to be pretty neat. All right, so now on to a Mac in a data center, because that's a little bit different. The idea is you want to get a Mac where it needs to be. The commitment time does vary between providers. So some as small as 24 hours, and of course there's definitely always some sort of a discount when you say you're going to have something for longer. But that 24-hour minimum actually comes from the macOS software license agreement. I've read it. It's exhilarating. You're all missing out, I'm telling you. So setup times can vary when it comes to this as well. Sometimes it's going to be ready right away or close to right away. Sometimes we need to add capacity, that sort of thing. Again, I'm not speaking from necessarily. We're gonna zero in on sort of where the stuff is from the cloud side from my current life. And depending on a vendor, again, I mentioned this might be a VM. There are also usually various storage options. It's typically not just going to be your SSD storage. So I'm not going to dance around it anymore. What's the Amazon one? Because this is basically what I get to work on. This is an AWS EC2 Mac instance, and it looks fairly familiar because in the middle of that is just a Mac Mini, and the Mac Mini is doing the processing. The Mac Mini has the RAM. That whole mess of other connections up there is also providing storage and networking. So this is right now a machine that you're running on bare metal. You have access to the underlying Mac hardware, so you can actually do that type 2 virtualization we were talking about. You can run TART, UTM, any of those. We've got a couple of those vendors in the AWS Marketplace, for example. And there are images. Images are in the cloud. This is a real thing, and it can be really useful as long as you know how to use it. But I would say of the folks in this room, a lot of those kind of caveats are probably things that we're pretty familiar with. You're creating this image, an Amazon Machine Image or an AMI from a snapshot, and you can even resize that as you need it to. And that's going to bring with you basically all of the stuff that is required for your system to boot, including any of the modifications you made, and not including, because if we're ever changing hardware using an image, it's not going to be able to call back to MDM properly. So that is something that if you try to bake it in, we'll show you how that can be easily remedied. So yeah, that storage and networking is coming over Thunderbolt, and there is a robot finger involved in this transaction here. And the upper right corner, I think, is a little pokey robot that if it needs firmware update, if it needs to be force shut down, the engineering team actually told me once that this was the most dependable way. This was the best. Like, they tried shorting the board. It was like cutting power. This was the best work for some reason. Yeah. So yeah, they built a finger for the robot. And this was really built primarily back in, I think it was 2020, late 2020, with CI/CD in mind, the continuous integration, continuous deployment, the use of really making this for folks that are writing software. So there's integrations with tools like Jenkins as well. So if you're building software or a whole lot of other stuff, you can actually get integration into this. So you can start this through the AWS console. There's command line. There's an API. There's infrastructure as code, which we'll touch on in a second, and they're ready in about 6 to 20 minutes. And I mentioned before, there is that 24-hour minimum. And Amazon does have 5 different available machines. This goes from an x86 Mac Mini to all the way up to right now an M2 Pro and an M1 Ultra with a full 128 gigs of RAM. So if you've got a RAM heavy workflow, that's definitely something. There's options. So what does this look like? Kind of, okay, if I wanted a Mac that way, I'm going to install the AWS CLI first. The only other thing I've done that's kind of outside of this is there's an AWS configure command where you're giving it your credentials. So once you have those in, it's just a sort of secret pair thing. I'm setting a couple variables here. I'm going to get an M2 Pro Mac Mini. I'm going to use that AMI ID. That's my image ID. So that one in particular, I've got a couple of pieces of software set. I've got a couple of TCC settings already set. So it's going to be able to do more than it could right out of the box. I've got a key pair as well up there, which is for SSH, which is the out-of-the-box ability to connect to it. There's SSH, and there is also There are also options like EC2 Instance Connect to just right through the site. So it's a two-step process. I'm going to first tell it I need a host, because this is where the billing starts. And I always point that out because nobody wants to be surprised by any billing, least alone me. So first, I've got my allocate hosts. I'm telling it where, I'm telling them how many I want. I turned on what's called auto placement, which basically means in the next command, I don't have to say which one I want. I can just say I want one. And then I'm running a run instance command. You can see I'm specifying the region availability zone to, in the case of the host. And I'm telling it the image ID, the name of my SSH key pair. This is a line that you need basically to say, okay, this needs one of those hosts. This is specific to macOS. If you've used EC2 stuff before, it's probably this last part of the command is the part that you normally do. That first part, though, is very important, of being able to take the host, because once you allocate, that's when the billing starts. Once you release it, that's when it stops. And there is what's called a scrubbing procedure. And this is basically its update of firmware, update of underlying SSD. That does take time. And even within the first 24 hours, that's one of those things where they do suspend the billing during that time it's unavailable. Again, I'm not here to I'm not here to sell, because this is my fun. So let's talk about how to do this a little bit of a different way. Infrastructure is code. One of my favorite quotes. We want to talk that right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand, which was Malcolm X in Message to the Grassroots, or also the Introduction to Cult of Personality by Living Color. Either way, though, I kind of love the line because it reminds me of this. It's kind of an API for clouds and infrastructure. Just imagine if you want something that in the cloud. I know that's very vague, but let's say I want a server, I want a subnet, I want to do a couple of different things, even in multiple cloud providers, and I want to put that all on one common language. That's infrastructure as code. So things like Terraform, Chef, Puppet, Ansible, these are really where you see some of that. AWS has their own as well. It's called, oh wow, I shouldn't have blanked out there. How did I blank on that? This is what happens live. It'll happen to you. CloudFormation, thank you very much. So yeah, it's the idea of what you're building, how you want it, and where you want it. So this is a Terraform sample of doing the same thing that we did in that command line, except with this infrastructure as code with Terraform. So we're defining, we say we need a host, and we're saying we need an instance running on top of that. We're telling them, okay, what image do I want? What key pair do I want to connect with? This is going to result in basically the same exact thing that we had on the other page. Except in this case, I think I just left it as a mac2.metal, which is an M1. And just a little bit on auto scaling too, because it is actually possible to do a lot of this where we're talking about like allocating the host and starting the instance. We've seen this code for single Mac. So auto scaling is basically taking a lot of this, saving it as a template, and working along with a thing called License Manager, which is a free software that lets you orchestrate the hosts. So auto scaling, it starts as many as needed according to your launch template. It can even auto release them once certain metrics are hit. So you can these metrics can depend on CPU, RAM pressure. AWS CloudWatch can basically take in just about anything from the system as long as you've got something like Node Exporter to bring it on, and there is also CloudWatch support built into the system. And yeah, this and you can even just do it manually. You can go up and down and say I want more or less max. But yeah, I mentioned this is that license manager. This reminds me in spirit a lot of what is now called apps and books and was once called VPP, where yeah, it's volume purchase, except you're using it for free apps all the time. This is exactly kind of in the same spirit. We're using free licenses in order to regulate how many of these hosts are going to be available or able to be allocated at one time. So it definitely kind of takes some of the pressure off of you as the admin to, oh, okay, somebody needs a Mac, I got to kind of crank this up. And the workflow, Otherwise, though, if you've done auto scaling in Linux, is exactly basically the same. The only difference is we're defining that the two things in the license manager, which is the host resource group and the license configuration that comes along with it. The 24-hour minimum does mean to remember you may want to do a little bit of planning when it comes to scaling in, because it will, it'll terminate your instance, but as that 24 hours goes, if something's not ready, it could start another one and you could end up with two because one is in that kind of scrubbing procedure. I just want to point that out just because it can be very easy to go, okay, I need 10 Macs right away and then not need, or I could just do one Mac and change the image 10 times and still be within that limit, for example. So it really does kind of time, money, a lot of that. And a little bit on connecting to a Mac. Because if you've ever, the folks in this room may remember Local Talk. I've played my share or two of a match of Bolo across that. Ethernet had weird connectors back in the day. Some of them kind of looked like cable. Farallon actually made a phone net connector, which literally was just take a phone wire and connect your two Macs over the serial port. Token ring, which we were talking about taking turns before. That is literally what this network is made of. A token travels across and it stops when it needs to, but then it can't do anything else for anybody else involved. Again, oversimplification. The Macintosh Office is something that existed with the Lisa at its helm. So that was a little bit of it may not have been the biggest hit that Apple's ever had, but definitely was it's interesting to sort of see the way that things have evolved, because traditionally you see RDP and terminal services for Microsoft, and VNC is, I'd say, what we see most often when it comes to connecting to a Mac. And again, also on the older side, emulation as well. This was even I did this on my LC that we saw back there. I ran soft PC to try to run Rise of the Triad. I think I never got it to, because a 68020 is not a powerhouse. But and also other third parties that offer kind of that remote access early on. Thursby Software's Dave, which not me, but I do love the fact that it's port 3283, which spells Dave on a phone keypad. So yeah, let's a little bit more on access. Again, we're going to go right over the easy stuff. How do you access a physical Mac? Input. You've got lots of options. You've got voice options. There's options definitely not listed here. Virtual machine is very, very similar. There are options to run this without a GUI. So if you did want to kind of make sure, give lots and lots of resources and not have that processing any overhead, a virtual machine is possible to just do headless. From beyond, though, this is where we were mentioning SSH is sort of that default way to get into an EC2 instance and an EC2 Mac instance as well. You can turn on VNC / Apple Remote Desktop / see, this is, again, the words are getting for me. Screen sharing, thank you. We have best audience ever. Best ever. But yeah, when it comes to kind of the more advanced stuff, very vaguely, it's really more looking at some more proprietary codecs. So things like Citrix. If you have a Citrix infrastructure, Citrix does work with macOS, especially on the cloud side. HP Anywhere is a product formerly known as Teradici. The idea is that that's something where it gives you enhanced, typically like an H.264 video and audio stream. So rather than getting we're trying our best, but this is a very old codec from VNC. We really do get that best of a much better picture and typically less latency because we're just not using as much bandwidth. Oops, sorry that. And USB forwarding is something I wanted to mention as well, because folks with needs like smart card readers, these are things that if you have a Mac in the cloud, everybody will take for granted where you're plugging into, say, your phone to your Mac and you want to do a test on an app. When that Mac is somewhere else, being able to do something like USB forwarding has been pretty useful. So I've personally tested out things from USB Network Gate, FlexiHub, and also. Oof. See, this is what happens when you don't put your notes down. But honestly, the USB forwarding options have been excellent and working very well with the cloud. That's, to me, that's one of those, like, from a technical mind, that's a tough thing to do, to just basically say, I'm going to make up my USB connection and just throw it through TCP. And let's talk about enrollment, because of course we're going to talk about enrollment. There are, of course, non-MDM enrollment types that do exist. This is really where we see the agent-based enrollment, which can be incredibly useful. It's not able to issue the MDM commands, and usually does kind of stop at a certain privilege bar, which seems to be getting kind of tighter and tighter as OSs move up. And mobile application management too is one thing that we've seen a lot of customers, or I've seen customers in the past asking about and implementing, just because it's not necessarily about, okay, do we need to say this entire device is ours? It's no, we just need to say this device is relatively safe and do our best to cut down on things like data exfiltration. And of course, the fun stuff, MDM. A lot of this, again, is probably very, very familiar to you. The biggest thing with ADE is you do need that hardware in order to test. There used to be a way to spoof a serial number, and back in more so in the x86 days, and I think there may be something coming along new on that, but don't hold me to that. But just going over kind of the enrollment types, because ADE is probably what we're most likely using for most things, for anything that's flowing through. User-initiated enrollment is that profile one. Send somebody an XML profile, they double-click it, and that's going to give them, in the end, a supervised device that is also able to that's also able to be removed by the user. So it's kind of, there's a few slight things that you can't quite enforce, but otherwise, to a Mac, user-initiated enrollment is fairly robust. And I'll mention user enrollment here just because it's confusing that they're named similar things. Show of hands, actually. Is anyone doing user enrollment? Okay, three's enough. Honestly, three's enough for me to change that from rare to uncommon. No longer here for completeness. So to take a look at, this is how it's done on the Cloud Macs. This is just a bit of a diagram. We're going to take an EC2 Mac instance running on a host, and we're going to use this enroll EC2 Mac script. Now, what I've done is the script itself has a setup process. It's just a short thing. We basically give it a few permissions and then create an image. We're booted from that image. So that image is running this code. This code doesn't have any credentials inside of it. There's nothing that's no secret information. I can pull this down from GitHub because it actually needs that secret information from ideally a secure place, and by default a secure place. What I'm using here is another AWS thing or two. So identity and access management is basically what keeps resources in AWS. That can be anything from to basically to access another or to not access another. I gave this particular instance the permission to read this secret, and that secret is, in this case, credentials for the local instance and also credentials for my Jamf server, specifically the API. So it's going to go back to the script with that information, and as that runs, the next thing it does is reaches out over the what they call VPC, or virtual private cloud networking, right out to the internet, right to, in this case, the Jamf Pro server, and that's getting a create invitation command. That invitation code comes back to the script again. The script is actually going to put that together into an XML profile, and from there, we'll actually complete the enrollment and give that Mac the what it needs. And as far as what that looks like, this I always say my demos are getting worse and worse because this isn't something the user sees. They don't have to, at the very least. This is something that can completely occur before anyone has the ability to connect or anything like that. So really being able to get this done, and again, this is a very, very much no hands are on anything. I think I just went back in here to show what the profiles were, but otherwise all those actions were automated with not a human at the helm. And finally, I do want to go on a little bit too to the future, because there's more than just the enrollment types we talked about earlier. We're all looking at ADDE, ADUE, forgetting that the A doesn't stand for Apple anymore and it's account. And being able to give that sort of those not quite a very similar set of administrative abilities via Apple account, rather than through any sort of profile. So it just makes a lot of the setup easier. And I've got experimental support for this in the Enroll EC2 Mac script that I was talking about earlier. And again, this is under the hood. When this script runs, oh, that was adorable. Where's my? All right, let's try that once more. All right, so yeah, this is also running. Again, no hands on keyboard. Sorry for the slight zoom in here, but this has. Oh no! Oh, hang on. This is. I love the new classic ones. So yeah, what's happening here is it's going through this flow, and the flow is definitely a more complex one than typically the profile-based one is, but very much is able to be automated here. What you're seeing also in action here and in the previous one is I'm an AppleScript nut, and I've got a session coming up a little later on that. I still can't believe anybody wants to hear me talk about it, but I'm so happy. But this is giving us that ability to get those same profiles. I used a demo server in this case just to understand and see this support. But yeah, this is actually something that it's in the code today, experimental right now so far for this account. But yeah, very much something that's looking to expand in a good way. All right, so now we can get down to. Oh, no, I was right. Come on. So I'm going to hit X too many times. One more. Now any questions? Because here's a bunny with a pancake on its head. Yeah. There's a meme quotient to be had. All right. I think you first and then... Good. Yes.
Well, first of all, thank you.
Yeah.
But my question is... It's a basic question. I saw that slide earlier about on Sequoia you can sign in with your Apple account. From what I've seen, it only works with personal Apple accounts and it doesn't work with managed Apple accounts. I don't know if this is a known limitation or if there's a way to get that working.
It is a known limitation.
It is a known limitation.
Okay.
Dude from Apple literally said it yesterday at security.
It is okay. So there's no way to get managed Apple account on that.
Far as I haven't tried it yet in Tahoe, but I don't think it's nothing yet. But oh, no, thank you. You actually have the answer to that. See, I think you're up.
I just remember someone literally asking the Apple dude exactly that question.
That's what happens. Answers come from remembering other people answer things. I think you got the next question, right?
Oh my God. Oh man. You ready?
I believe in you all. Watch out for the coffee. Yes.
So I'm assuming that it's no big deal to share EBS storage between EC2 instances that are of different architectures. Like if you have Linux machines or whatever, can you access the same volume, or is that just a limitation of EC2, like one volume per instance?
It's possible to attach multiple volumes. So yeah, you can take a volume from Linux as long as the Mac's file system is able to read it, then it would be able to launch as another, or to mount as another file system.
Oh, I guess that's a good point. Like you'd have to use Fuse or some garbage.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's probably. I remember. I wrestled with Fuse so much, but yeah, that may be kind of that next step if it's something that doesn't come up. Traditionally, too, with empty ones, it comes up as an unformatted volume, so it will actually prompt you to format it when it comes up. Awesome. Next.
You're talking about scaling devices and like being able to ramp up multiple instances at once. I'm just curious, are you looking at that more from like app development and needing resources for scaling in that capacity, or are you spinning these up for end users to have a remote machine that is in the cloud? Like what's kind of your use case?
App development is the most common. Usually CI/CD farms are the biggest ones that's sort of like, okay, we need 60 Macs spun up right now because our developers are building that much. Sometimes that is a developers working directly on the machine itself to do that. So yeah, it's I don't know if I don't really have a percentage of it or anything, but those are kind of the two most common use cases that I'd say we see.
So it works well for both either way.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Cool, thanks. Anybody else? Serge. Over the head.
So just quick, just wondering if there's like any security requirements you have for spinning up those CI/CD farms. Are you required to have any like security agents or any agents at all on those?
That's a good question because it's something I'm talking about enrolling some of the cloud stuff. These are short-lived instances, so sometimes it doesn't make sense to load them up with every security agent that you have. Sometimes it is something that you need to do. Right out of the box, it is coming with things like Homebrew pre-installed, and typically what you can do is literally just let this sort of do its thing without any interference. But when it comes to sort of the built-in security is more on kind of the AWS side where that EBS, that Elastic Block Store, is encrypted. Instead of using File Vault, for example, you'd be encrypting using EBS. That's AES 256, so it's actually going to be a higher standard of encryption, for example. But yeah, that's definitely something to kind of keep in mind is that since these are operating on what's basically an external drive, it is a little bit of a different posture. All right. Okay. If anybody wants to check out some other information, I've got a little bit of. I'm just realizing this is probably just going to one one repo right now, but this is just a few pieces of information, the hub for the script that I was showing earlier, and a YouTube tutorial on how to get that done. And honestly, I could not say thank you more. So folks, definitely reach out, and thanks for showing up.